It's Donald Trump's war, but is it now also NATO's problem? Europeans forced to bear security and financial consequences of the second conflict at its doorstep. We'll see if our panel agrees with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who assures it's only a matter of a couple of weeks before traditional allies agree to help secure the Strait of Hormuz. Before Europeans follow a U.S. president who started the war without consulting them into a potential quagmire, several questions. Why should they help? Can the so-called coalition of the willing, led by the likes of France and the U.K., fend off both Russia's onslaught against Ukraine and its financial leverage, its support into firm backing for Kyiv? And what happens if Trump emerges weakened and wounded from a poorly planned campaign against Iran? Will the United States look at those traditional allies in a better light? Or will he blame Europeans and turn on Ukraine? Today in the France 24 debate, how do allies handle Trump and his Iran war? With us, Irina Krasnoshtan, Program Director at the International Center for Ukrainian Victory, the advocacy group. You're here in Paris for the Paris Defense and Strategy Forum. Thanks for being with us here.
Thank you for the invitation.
Also in attendance there is Helga Kalm, Deputy Director of the Estonia-based International Center for Defense and Security think tank. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Manlio Graziano, Director of the Spikeman Center for Geopolitical Analysis. Your latest book, in Italian so far, is called How We Go to War. How are you?
Thank you very much.
Grégoire Rousse, Director of the Europe, Russia, and Eurasia programs at the think tank Chatham House. Thank you for being with us from London.
Pleasure.
On the go, you can listen to the show. You can also like it and subscribe to it wherever podcasts are streamed. Yeah, irked indeed. Many an eyebrows raised on this continent after NATO's Mark Rutte spoke Sunday with U.S. television network CBS.
I've been in several conversations this week with the president, and the good news is that, look, we had the US for weeks planning for epic fury. And for reasons of security and safety, they could not share with European allies and allies around the world and partner countries what they were doing, because that would have jeopardized the effect of the first attack.
Or it would have allowed you to plan.
So it is only logical that European countries needed a couple of weeks to come together.
Needed a couple of weeks to come together. Grégoire Rousse, your reaction to that clip?
Well, you know, it's usual Mark Rutte. It's a balancing act, really. It's true. It's taken a bit of time for Europeans to get together, and I hold from actually a European head of state discussion last week that Donald Trump complained that Europeans had been bad allies to what the head of state said. But Mr. President, with all due respect, you did not tell us about your intention to join the Israelis in declaring war on Iran. And actually, there was no war declaration for that matter, because the Congress did not approve anything officially. And yes, it's been a few weeks of coming to terms with the fact that there was another nail in the coffin of the transatlantic relations.
When you hear Mark Rutte talking about sort of coming around, it sounds in that clip, and if you hear the longer version, it definitely sounds like it. Like he's saying coming around to Donald Trump's way of thinking. There are published reports that a lot of Europeans are displeased with this messaging.
Yeah, that's putting it very mildly. Yes, indeed. But again, we need to look at the bigger picture. We Americans are still an important party in Ukraine, and NATO can just not afford at the moment of antagonizing the U.S. administration. So it's again very painful publicly for Mark Rutte to take the burden of saying what many do not want to hear. But that is just what the U.S. president might be pleased to hear, and we might need that at the moment to keep the U.S. on Europe's side, to keep, if not supporting Ukraine directly, which is actually what the U.S. is still doing by providing military equipment, at least not turning their back on Ukraine and Europeans altogether and lifting sanctions on Russia faster than they actually have been.
Yeah, that's the heart of the matter in this discussion. Helga Kam, what did you think of what you heard from Mark Rutte there?
I think Europeans are still considering the different options. Given the initial statements by President Trump, the war should be over in a week or two as well. So it's a little unclear what kind of war we're in. We as maybe more collectively the world, given that it's a little complicated. The end state is also a little frivolous or not very well defined. So how do you decide that the war is over? What are the signs that now we have won or we have lost? Or if your aims are so vaguely phrased as they are in this case, it's very difficult for Europeans to decide whether they want to go along with it. But I think there are ways Europeans can join in assisting different things. And
You're being very polite. What about European public opinion?
I think the American public opinion is not with the war either. So I think both sides, it's very difficult because the war hasn't been explained to the public. Neither in America nor in Europe. It's very unclear what we're trying to achieve there. And I think that's the same on both sides of the alliance. But I think for Europeans, we've already directed some of our naval ships to the region and whatnot. So we're defending our own interests in the region. That does not mean that we need to go and guard the Strait of Hormuz. But I think the level of negotiations now starting, Europeans are not involved in that either. So I'm very curious to see how it will play out between the Americans and Iranians, those potential negotiations in Pakistan or Turkey.
Irina Krasnostaran, first of all, there's February 28th, this everyone surprise war, on top of the one which, and for Ukrainians, it's been a very difficult winter under barrages of Russian missiles. Again, your thoughts on how the Europeans should be reacting to Donald Trump's call to now help secure the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, first of all, I believe that in the allies consult with each other, and that's basically the essence of the NATO alliance, is to kind of go into something with the consent of others. But that's why I think that, of course, the Europeans are now frustrated because they were not consulted, and now they are supposed to go with the US together. But I think that this is a momentum for the European allies to actually talk to the US on the fact that if they are to help the US in this war, then the US needs to really help on the war against Russia, because so far we know that the Americans have not been very much involved. Yes, there are some sort of intelligence sharing and so on, but even with the latest, how the US are selling weapons to Ukraine through the money of European allies, even with this, we have some problems now because of the resources that have been taken, in the Middle East.
Europeans can leverage?
Well, I hope that Mark Rutte, in addition to, explaining why Europeans need to follow Donald Trump, will also try to use his influence on Donald Trump to pass this message over. And I only see this as a kind of opportunity to leverage the situation.
All right, you heard Irina there, Manuel Graziano. She's hoping Mark Rutte will quietly tell Donald Trump to help Ukraine.
Yeah.
Will he?
Always thought that hope is when you don't have anything else. So I think that this is one of the cases, and count on Mark Rutte, it's very difficult. By the way, every time I hear someone saying then, talking about Donald Trump's way of thinking, I don't know if they realize if they are serious or not, because there is no Donald Trump's way of thinking. He doesn't think about what he says. He changes idea every moment. And Mark Rutte, since the beginning of the war, let's say even the war in Ukraine, is just, he was not secretary at the time, but when he took charge, he repeats what Americans want him to say.
Isn't that what a NATO Secretary General does?
Exactly. This is his role. Yeah. But he's a kind of, the puppets you make speak, and you're a ventriloquist, and America is the ventriloquist, and Rutte is the puppet. I wouldn't trust Donald Trump, of course, but I wouldn't trust Rutte either. Because
Is it a Donald Trump problem or a United States problem?
it's a United States.
I ask because ignoring allies did not start with the Trump administration. So said the French chief of defense staff, Army Air General Fabien Mandon. He spoke at the opening of the Paris Defense and Strategy Forum that you're attending. Let's take a listen.
La relation reste très forte.
The France-US relationship remains very strong, but unfortunately, after disengagement from Afghanistan in which there was no consultation, even though you remember we intervened in Afghanistan at the request of the Americans who invoked Article 5 of NATO, they chose to leave without informing us. They have just decided to intervene in the near Middle East without notifying us.
Décidé d'intervenir au Proche et Moyen-Orient sans nous prévenir.
So nothing new?
Yeah, there is something new. Is that now it became systematic, in the sense that they do whatever they want, and the lack of answer from.
Because that was under the Biden administration.
Yeah. I understand, but this is a trend. Of course, that there is an American problem because it's the Americans who elected Donald Trump. So it's very easy to push all the burden on the shoulder of Donald Trump, but there are 77 million people who voted for him. So it's an American problem. It's the administration problem, because within the administration you have different ideas. No one knows exactly why they did this war, why they started this war, and because they contradict each other. So this is a problem of the United States, of the administration of the United States, of the trend in which the United States have been in the last 20 years, or at least, but it's worse and worse, every day worse. And this last intervention in Iran shows that it reached a point of almost no return. And the problem is the Europeans, I agree when it said that they don't want to antagonize the United States because it plays against them. But if they still don't antagonize the United States, they will not have an independent position, and the United States will keep doing whatever it wants because it knows that it doesn't have any opposition from anybody, not Carney, not Japan, not South Korea, not Europe. Who else? Of course, China and Russia say, oh, shouldn't do that, but the position of Russia and China is expected.
Grégoire Rousse, do NATO allies know how to leverage, how to, at some instances, I'm paraphrasing what Manlio said, play bad cop with the United States?
Well, I would not look at the picture that way. I'd look at the bigger picture, actually. You might have heard that the Iranians have fired 2 missiles to the Chagos Island, the Diego Garcia air base close to Mauritius. And if those missiles missed their target, it's because one got lost on its way, but the second one was intercepted by Americans. Without American support, European air and missile defense system would be much weaker. So there's a question of dependency that needs to be addressed at the moment, and you just cannot think without that question of dependency. If the US president were to say, you know what, if you're under a threat, that's your own problem. Our missile interception systems weren't planned to enter into the game, and it will be your problem, well, we won't be better off. And that is the reality that Mark Rutte has in mind when he says what he said. And it quite frankly heightens the burning question of European, not just defense integration, but European capability and when it comes to ballistic missile warning and the integration of European air and missile defense systems.
So, Grégoire, on Tuesday, I was able to interview the former Secretary General, Anders Fogh Rasmussen. What he told me was that the time for flattery, come to daddy kind of statements like we heard from Mark Rutte last year, talking about Donald Trump, that's over. And he was putting a lot of faith in most notably the French and the UK to lead a so-called coalition of the willing on security. Do you believe in that? Or again, like with your example of the Chagos Islands, is the US ultimately the one that keeps the peace?
Well, you meant with Ukraine. Absolutely. I think the coalition of the willing has been a real diplomatic success insofar as Keir Starmer and President Macron have actually managed to foster a synchronization of European and American sanctions. Well, now there are limits, of course, after the US administration decided to lift part of their sanctions on Lukoil and Rosneft. But yes, it's obvious that it has shown a different face of Europe, the ability of going towards a multi-speed kind of Europe, of bringing back the UK in the strategic circle of reflection, and of going their own way in the case of a weaker kind of involvement of the US. When it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, I think it's slightly more challenging. You saw that the UK accepted that the American used their base of Diego Garcia, and many Europeans, including the French, are not so sure of whether it doesn't come at a cost. I mean, what the Iranians did by targeting the base, in spite of the UK saying that this is only defensive and in no way offensive, it's just blurring the lines between what is offensive and what is defensive, and it just increases the price. It shows that you will pay a heftier price if you join the Americans and the Israelis in their military operation. And I think many European countries are thinking very thoroughly about it. And the last point that I think we shouldn't forget is that of all countries that have been very vocal that those past few weeks, Spain and the UK have clearly come out. Those are the countries that paid the heftier price when it comes to the aftermath of the war in Iraq with the terrorist attacks in 2004 and 5.
Yeah, there's the afterburn, and certainly that is a consideration. There are heightened security concerns that have been spelled out here in France as well. While we're watching Iran, again, there's other problems at Europe's doorstep. Nearly 1,000 Russian drones in broad daylight landing on Ukraine Tuesday, everywhere from Lviv in the west of the country to Sumy, right near the Russian border.
I saw it in front of me while I was driving the route. It's scary, of course.
But you're still driving?
Still driving.
So that was on Tuesday. Wednesday, Russia's big Baltic ports of Primorsk and Ust-Luga suspending crude oil and oil products loadings after massive Ukrainian drone attacks sparked a blaze which could be seen from across the Baltic Sea in Finland. 2 stray Ukrainian drones landing in neighboring Latvia and Estonia, including one that hit an Estonian power station without causing damage.
It is important to state that Estonia was not the target of the attack. Based on the information we know, this was a Ukrainian counterattack to Russian attacks, and it has now reached our borders.
Helga Kam, while we're all watching Iran, is there the feeling when you're in the Baltics that it's heating up even more?
I think we're, of course, worried if the attention of the world is distracted by different conflicts happening at the same time. And the focus is not on what we feel is the most immediate threat to European security, because I think majority of European countries agree upon that we need to prepare for the threat of Russian full-scale war against all of Europe. That is our main priority. Iran is a slight distraction. It does increase oil prices and whatnot, but it's not as directly impacting us as if, let's say, Russia would fully attack one EU member state or a NATO member state, which we cannot discount either. Of course, we're worried. These kinds of incidents happening in Estonia. I must say that this morning it took us a few hours to understand that it was a Ukrainian drone, not a Russian drone. Had it been a Russian drone, it would, of course, increase the levels of worry a lot more, especially given that Russia has started these false rumors lately that there's a potential Narva Republic forming in eastern Estonia. It's actually some Russian spies trying to create some turmoil where it does not exist. The population in Narva is not pro-Russian or has no interest in joining Russian Federation as a republic. So I think this is sort of, the war creates a sphere of confusion. And as we actually talked about before the program started, war today has become very difficult. Sometimes you're at a war without knowing that you're at war. And I think Russia is already waging a hybrid war against
Do you think Estonia is at war without knowing it?
I don't think we're at war, but I think we are living in a complicated world where relations are not stable necessarily.
Irina, you come to Paris from Poland, from Ukraine. Again, you've been knocked off the top rank of the news cycle. Even on Tuesday, when we had all those daytime drones that landed everywhere across Ukraine.
Absolutely. I mean, even now we are discussing, we have spent quite a lot of time discussing what Mark Rutte was saying, what Donald Trump is thinking or not thinking. But actually, I think it's really hard for a lot of people to comprehend, like 1,000 drones in Ukrainian airspace. There were two waves, one at night and the other one in the broad daylight, and basically attacking a lot of cities across the whole country, as you mentioned, and even in Lviv, which some people consider a more safer place in Ukraine, Lviv city center and actually UNESCO site was targeted. So I think it's really, I mean, we are living in this nightmare all this time. At the beginning, you mentioned the harsh winter that Ukraine has lived through. So it seems like, of course, what is happening in Iran is taking out the attention from Ukraine and a lot of the decisions. And I would want to go back on one of the points about the coalition of the willing, and I would slightly disagree here with Grégoire, because actually, I see, yes, the coalition of the willing in theory is a very good format, and we have really good partners there, UK, France, and a lot of others. But if you look, the idea has been already for a year discussed, and where we are, the coalition of the willing is discussing the things that will happen after the ceasefire. But where is the ceasefire? We are not any step closer to a ceasefire. If you look again, the negotiation process has been taken completely out of anything, because the same people who are leading on the US side the negotiation track are busy, with Iran and other things. So we are not anywhere closer to ceasefire. So the coalition of the willing, while the ideas are really good, they are not implemented at this point of time. And we already lost one more year of talking and, very resolute messages of support. And once again, I have a lot of respect to our partners.
So what should this coalition of the willing be doing?
Well, the coalition of the willing should
but before a ceasefire, what should they be doing?
But, in my opinion, it was actually really methodologically even wrong to start discussing the deployment of forces after ceasefire, because it gives, Putin an excellent message to say why we need actually to achieve ceasefire if the European troops will be then in Ukraine. So in my opinion, there should be discussion about even troops on the ground before the ceasefire.
Troops on the ground?
I mean, look, for a really long time, we have been advocating, for example, for an initiative which is called Sky Shield. Even in the studio, we were discussing it. And European partners, we were, discussing this idea that they should help Ukraine with shooting down, intercepting some of the missiles coming into Ukrainian airspace. And this hasn't materialized. And this is, you don't maybe need to put the troops on the ground, but you can put additional assets in the sky.
Grégoire Rouz, if that coalition of the willing had the means, would they have the will to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine?
The question of the will depends on the ability of political leaders to actually take such a step. Even in Italy, and actually I take that example specifically because Giorgia Meloni hasn't been the strongest advocate of Ukraine lately, but we see that after the loss of the referendum, there's no all-powerful leader in Europe. So everything that Irina has said, I think, makes absolute sense, but we need to understand that it's already a miracle that we have managed to stay together for the past 4 years, and that even in countries where you had historically strong pro-Russian culture, the support has remained relatively intact. So the question of no-fly zone, boots on the ground, will be very difficult to sell to the voters, especially in countries where you are facing significant electoral electoral moments, especially France and Germany for that matter. I think where the coalition of the willing could do more is on sanctions, of course, but it's undeniable that the latest developments in the Middle East have slowed down the process. I mean, it's the worst timing, really, because the sanctions that the coalition of the willing had managed to synchronize, again, between Washington and European capitals, were starting to work. Were really genuinely starting to work. We could sense the first cost for the Russian economy, and right when that was started to be felt by the Russians, well, the war started, and now the Ural crude oil barrel is just skyrocketing. I mean, the Russian budget for this year was made based on a $59 a barrel. Now it's above $100 and almost $20. I mean, it's just tremendously high, and if that sustains, it will provide Moscow with a more comfortable financial room to sustain its military effort in Ukraine.
All right, and of course, if Europe wants to stand on its own 2 feet, if NATO allies want to stand on their own 2 feet, they're only as strong as their weakest link. In this instance, there's a nation holding up the EU's €90 billion loan to Ukraine. It happens to be holding a general election in just over 2 weeks. On Monday in Budapest, to support Hungary's Viktor Orban, leaders of far-right parties who sit with his Fidesz in the European Parliament showed up, including France's Marine Le Pen, along with Dutchman Geert Wilders and Italy's Matteo Salvini.
Russia provides Hungary's energy, so as a result, I don't contest the fact that they have ties. And that's precisely the reason Mr. Orban opposes the €90 billion loan. The reality is that Ukraine disrupts the supply of oil from Russia to Hungary, which triggers grave consequences for the Hungarian people. The hostility between Hungary and Ukraine is also linked to the fact that Mr. Zelensky threatened Mr. Orban in an almost physical manner by saying he would send in the army in front of his home. So I feel like saying in this case, the hostility is shared, and maybe the blame is shared.
Her party, Manuel Graziano, frontrunners in next year's presidential elections. Some accuse Donald Trump of taking a wrecking ball to NATO. What happens if the far right wins in France in 2027?
Yeah, this is the main question in my opinion. And we were talking about the coalition of willings and what they can do. And if they are not able to oppose the United States, the things will go on this way forever. Because this is the real problem, in the sense that, in my opinion, it's impossible to understand why the United States launched the war against Iran. They don't know either, so it's very difficult. But there are a sum of different reasons, because within the administration there are different voices, different interests, different political lines. Donald Trump here, one day one, the other day the other one. So the result is to put together, even if they are in contradiction with each other. And one of the reasons, in my opinion, is precisely because he wants to close this war. And the only way, war in Russia against Ukraine, and the only way for his point of view to close this war is to oblige Ukraine to surrender. So this is the best situation ever from this point of view. Because in Europe, this is the reaction, and this reaction would spread inevitably. The more the prices of raw materials, energy, raw materials grows up, and the more people would like, for sure, leave this war and reopen the channel from Russia to Europe, or the energetic channel, I would say. So, and I'm not surprised that Marine Le Pen says what she says. I'm not surprised that Donald Trump sent a message, a video message, to this meeting in Budapest to support Orban.
Yeah, the CPAC meeting over the weekend, the conservative lobby group.
Exactly, where you had this group, Marine Le Pen, Salvini, and so on and so forth. And it was also a message from Donald Trump. So I see something a little bit coherent over there, and the coherence is at expenses of Ukraine, in my opinion.
Grégoire Rousse, there's going to be the U.S. Vice President, who's also due to campaign for Viktor Orban before April the 12th. What message does that send to, we were talking about this coalition of the willing, but basically to all allies of Ukraine?
Well, I mean, it's not new. It started already after the Munich Security Conference when State Secretary Rubio visited Viktor Orban and Robert Fico in Bratislava, Slovakia. So, I mean, it's not... they are not entering the campaign now. It started weeks ago. If you read the National Security Strategy published last autumn, it's clear that they see Central and Eastern Europe as the doorway for the MAGA ideology in Europe. And Viktor Orban is a real hero for the MAGA movement, really. I mean, he's the kind of Christian crusader of the 21st century, and they've adored him as a role model. So there's something very special when it comes to the relation of the current administration with Viktor Orban. Now, the question is, what kind of an impact will that make? I honestly think it will be very limited. What is driving the conversation and the campaign, really, in Hungary now is obviously high energy prices and the level of the economy, really. And whatever you do, whomever you try to get in your campaign to speak in your support will not change your purchasing power and will not improve the condition of the health system in your country when what took 2 months or 1 month a few years ago now takes 6 months. You know, whoever takes the stage in favor of Orban won't change much. And I think we've learned by now to make a distinction between the kind of a positioning that the Trump administration has been taking when it comes to, quite frankly, trying to influence the electoral outcome, and on the other, their commitment to supporting Ukraine and imposing sanctions on Russia. Although, again, after the war against Iran, their sanction strategy has shifted slightly.
So, Helge Kamm, again, it's this question of if Viktor Orban can hold up this 90 billion euro loan to Ukraine, how much leverage do Europeans have?
Let's see how the elections go on April 12. Currently, the polls would favor Orban's rival, but I think overall, the tendency is not maybe as negative as our conversation leads us to think. I think several European countries are actually increasing their defense investment, most importantly Germany, who I would say even worries some other European countries because it's increasing its defense investment so much. So I think Europeans are doing quite a bit to actually stand on their 2 feet and stand up. I think it's a bit of pick your moment, what matters to you, where you stand up. So I think the picture is not as negative, and sometimes to me it seems it's actually our enemies or adversaries who try to picture Europe as very divided, as very weak. And in reality, I think when push comes to shove, we tend to do the right thing in the end. So yes, there are hiccups and we can be sometimes slow, but the overall tendency is not as negative. And when you look at, for instance, polling within Russia, then the Europeans have replaced the United States as enemy number 1. And it's maybe a signal when you look at Russian polling that they see us actually as strong. So all our sanctions and whatnot is having an impact. And I think we shouldn't fall prey to the narrative that Europe is so weak and divided. I think we managed to stick together quite well. And I think we shouldn't overemphasize the negative. Yes, there are definitely concerns ahead, and we're never going to go back to this beautiful day and the before. The Americans will stay the way they are. They are withdrawing from Europe, from the large-scale presence that they had here. And we're not going to go back to having relationship as it was with Russia before, but I think we're ready for it.
We're ready for it, you say, but right now, I'll just tell you, Irina, what's been there's the speaker of Iran's parliament who in the last hour is warning that based on his intelligence reports, they're really worried about a possible invasion of an Iranian island. So probably a reference, we don't know yet, to Karg Island. We suspect that's what it is. So that doesn't sound like we're getting close to signing on the dotted line. Of course, it could all just be part of the bargaining process. Nonetheless, if it is the United States that gets bogged down, if energy prices do soar, Donald Trump's going to be looking to blame somebody. Is he going to be looking to blame himself for not consulting his allies, or will he be looking to blame the Europeans and, as Manlio was saying, the Ukrainians?
Well, you know, Ukrainians are very used to be blamed by Trump because whenever anything goes wrong, he likes to blame Ukraine, and we have been blamed for, you know, the negotiation process. Somehow Donald Trump always see a willingness in Putin's eyes or in Russia's, you know, words and so on, but he doesn't see it on Ukrainian side. So I would not be surprised, but I think actually Ukrainians have done quite a lot to help at least some of the Middle East countries to counter the drone attacks from Iran. So I'm not sure we are to be blamed here. But I wanted to...
I just want to pick up on that point, because we saw, for instance, this Wednesday, it was drones that hit this fuel storage facility at Kuwait's International Airport, and Saudi Aramco is in talks for, that's just one example, Saudi Arabia's national oil company, in talks to secure its oil facilities with Ukraine, with two private companies inside of Ukraine. Is that enough of a guarantee, if you will, a backstop? If we're helping, if Ukraine is helping the countries that Donald Trump is closest to, then that's enough of a guarantee that he won't turn on us?
Well, it's not enough guarantee. There is no guarantee with Donald Trump in any situation, but I think it at least provides Ukraine with a much stronger position, because if we are here not just as someone whom Donald Trump very often, you know, describes as a beggar or as a salesman or something like that when he refers to, for example, Ukrainian president, then we are at least here in a stronger position as a contributor to someone's security. So I think it strengthen our position. But I wanted to go back a little bit on the Orban thing, because for Ukraine it's very, very important, because actually Viktor Orban is not just blocking the 90 billion loan that was agreed at the end of last year. And actually from Ukrainian perspective it does look pessimistic, because we are now at the end of March, and if we are still waiting for the elections, it will be in April, and we don't know when this money will be. So actually, Hungary is also blocking the next package of sanctions from the EU side. So there is another problem there. And also, Hungary is threatening with some other things Ukraine. So I would say that there is a big problem with Hungarian side, and I'm not very optimistic. I mean, yes, there are polls, and for the elections, everything is possible, but at this particular point of time, it's still an element of weakness on the European side, because they're not able to move forward. Look, Ursula von der Leyen was in Kyiv on 24th of February to commemorate the fourth year of the full-scale invasion, and she promised there that the decision will be found. And we are months later, and there is no decision found.
Manu Graziano, again, two questions here. One is how the EU gets around this question of Hungary with its blocking minority of one in this case, and two, how much, because Ukraine is at the forefront of this drone technology, how much does that, well, guarantee its usefulness of the country to Donald Trump and to the United States?
How Europeans can get around the problem of Hungary or whoever else is blocking the decisions, because they have rules, and the rules are the rules of unanimity. So it is for Spain or Hungary, I don't know, because they created some rules that they are self-imprisoning the movement of the European Union. So probably
start depriving. There is a clause where you can start depriving one of the countries that is not complying with the values of the others.
If they are not able to get out, to get free of these oppositions, so they cannot do anything else. The only thing could be, at the beginning of this crisis, I was thinking that the coalition of willing would be the tool to avoid to go through the rules of the European Union. But now I'm much less secure. And then the other question was about, the second question was
about whether or not
Ukraine can have
we've seen
leverage.
With this war, and both wars actually, we've seen how countries are depleting their traditional anti-missile defenses, very costly, and the Ukrainians have the technology for a cheaper solution.
Yeah, but Ukraine has, first of all, the need to use for themselves. So this is a problem because they cannot sell them. They can just have some discussion about the technologies and something like that. But I don't think that it can change very much the problem in itself.
Grégoire Russe, you agree?
Look, I think, again, on Hungary, I see two solutions. First of all, it's true you have unanimity, but there have been such things as off-budget discussions. There has been aid to Ukraine that bypassed the unanimity to ensure that people like Orban would not slow the EU down. So, Orban at this stage has slowed down, but he won't make it impossible. It just requires some legal twists, but it will be possible. He is definitely using it for electoral purpose. I don't exclude that he could press a button all of a sudden a few days before the election and say all of a sudden, hey, you know what? I'm no longer putting my veto, in the hope that he would gain some more votes from the center. I don't rule that out. What the EU could do is just simply have a more Trump-like approach and say, let's do a deal. If the problem of the Druzhba pipeline in Ukraine, okay, we'll send technicians to Ukraine, and we'll sort this out. If that is your main argument, so I don't think it's necessary to escalate any further with the Ukrainian president, who has, I must also stress, not necessarily adopted the best diplomatic tone to water down the crisis. When it comes to drones, no, absolutely. I mean, Ukraine needs to reinforce its stockpile. On the other hand, it's an interesting development because you have seen a rise in interest from Middle Eastern countries in the Ukrainian drone industry, while at the same time countries like India have floated the possibility of turning down the Russian air defense system, and that would be a kind of parallel trend whereby the Ukrainians would increase their export market for the drones, and the Russians would lose some market grounds for their air defense systems. So there is an interesting development in that direction. And the last thing it shows is that the future of European defense innovation is actually in Ukraine at the moment, and therefore any send by Europe to Ukraine is not just aimed at supporting the government and public services, but it also is meant to support the development of European defense innovation.
Helga Kalm, we're running short on time. This defense conference that's taking place here in Paris, kind of like a redux version of the one in Munich, and you rub elbows with a lot of brass. And a year ago, everybody was still reeling after the remarks Donald Trump, as vice president, had made in Munich. This year, now it's not one war but two. What would you, when you return home, what would you say the mood was in Paris?
I would say it's very pragmatic, actually. We're looking at the nuts and bolts and how to make European defense work. How do we kind of manage within Europeans to not fight among ourselves, but to make each other stronger? How do we rearm Europe? How do we actually develop the capabilities necessary to defend Europe? Should the United States pull back further, or should there be another attack? Then U.S. is kind of focused on something else. We need to develop our own industry, and I think that's the sort of pragmatic view that I take home from here, that there's less stress that, oh, the Americans said this or that, and I think we tend to complain so much about that rather than like, let's actually do then something. Let's put the money where our mouth is.
So they've let it go.
I think so.
All right, we'll leave it there for now. Helga Kalm, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Irina Krastashan. I want to thank Manuel Graziano. Grégoire Russe for being with us from London. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.